In 1985, the Breakfast Club made us believe one day of detention could change everything. But behind the nostalgia lies a truth few talk about. From addiction and loss to quiet disappearances, the cast's real lives reveal how early fame can wound far deeper than detention ever could. Their journeys in 2026 will leave you truly stunned. Emilio Estevez as Andrew Clark. Emilio Estevez was born on May 12, 1962, in New York City, United States. At 23 years old, he played Andrew Clark, the disciplined high school athlete suffocating under expectations in the Breakfast Club. That performance quietly grounded the film, showing how pressure to win can hollow a person from the inside. That tension mirrored his reality off-screen. As the eldest son of Martin Sheen, Emilio grew up surrounded by art, politics, and performance, yet emotionally sidelined by a father whose career kept him frequently absent. Determined not to coast on inherited fame, Emilio rejected the Sheen surname and insisted on building a career under Estevez, a decision rooted in pride but also fear of being forever dismissed as the actor's son. Early successes in demanding ensemble films like The Outsiders brought visibility, but they also deepened his internal struggle to prove legitimacy rather than lineage. Fame arrived quickly and destabilized everything around him. A long relationship with model Carrie Sally resulted in 2 children, yet no marriage, followed by public and emotionally draining custody disputes that stripped away any illusion of privacy. His later marriage to Paula Abdul in 1992 appeared to offer reinvention, blending 2 high-profile careers into a glamorous union, but incompatible lifestyles, constant travel, and professional pressure fractured the relationship by 1994. The divorce left behind a quiet, emotional exhaustion that success could not mask. Those unresolved fractures spilled into self-destruction. By the late 1980s, alcohol and drug abuse began to erode his focus, threatening to derail a career still considered promising. The shift came not through a dramatic collapse but through retreat. Emilio stepped away from the spotlight and moved behind the camera. Directing and writing projects like Bobby and later The Way allowed him to process themes of loss, responsibility, and redemption, replacing excess with discipline and control earned rather than performed. Today, Emilio Estevez is 64 years old, living deliberately far from the chaos that once defined his public image. He works selectively as a filmmaker, devotes time to family, and invests in agriculture and sustainable living, choosing permanence over applause. With an estimated net worth of around $18 million, his life no longer reads as a rise and fall Hollywood arc, but as a slower, harder story about choosing balance after learning, painfully, what ambition alone can destroy. Paul Gleason as Richard Vernon. Paul Gleason was born on May 4, 1939, in Jersey City, New Jersey, United States. At 46 years old, he played Richard Vernon, the rigid vice principal who embodies institutional authority in the Breakfast Club. His performance became the immovable force of the film, the adult wall every teenager had to confront before they could understand themselves. That authority was not invented for the screen. Gleason grew up in a working-class family and learned early that survival came before comfort. As a teenager, he worked construction jobs, lifting heavy materials and breathing in asbestos dust day after day. Sports once offered a possible escape, but injuries ended those hopes abruptly, forcing him to start over. Later, acting became a dream but a necessity, pushing him toward reliability. Hollywood never treated him as a leading man, only as a man who could be trusted to hold the frame together. He built a career playing figures of control, officers, administrators, corporate enforcers, roles that demanded presence rather than sympathy. Films like Trading Places and later Die Hard made him recognizable but never celebrated, locking him into a cycle of constant work with limited advancement. The grind paid the bills, but it also reinforced the sense of always standing just outside the spotlight. That professional pressure followed him home. His first marriage, to Susan Keel, eroded under long absences, financial anxiety, and the emotional distance that comes from always being on call for the next role. A second marriage brought more stability, but it could not erase decades of fatigue and compromise. Gleason rarely spoke publicly about regret. Then the cost of his early labor surfaced. Decades after leaving construction sites behind, Gleason was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer directly linked to asbestos exposure. The illness progressed relentlessly, weakening the same body that had endured years of physical work and punishing filming schedules. Even as his health declined, his screen legacy, particularly his imposing presence in films like Die Hard, remained frozen in time, untouched by the suffering behind it. Sadly, Paul Gleason died on May 27, 2006, at 67 years old in Burbank, California, from mesothelioma. He was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery, joining countless Hollywood figures whose labor outweighed their recognition. With an estimated net worth of about $2 million, his life stands as a quiet indictment of endurance without reward. Anthony Michael Hall as Brian Johnson. Anthony. Michael Hall was born on April 14, 1968, in Boston, Massachusetts, United States. At 17 years old, he played Brian Johnson, the anxious academic prodigy crushed by expectation in The Breakfast Club. His performance became the film's quiet conscience, proving that fear, guilt, and self-blame could be just as destructive as rebellion or rage. That pressure existed long before the cameras rolled. Raised by a single mother who worked relentlessly and moved from city to city, Hall learned responsibility before stability. Acting became both income and identity while he was still a child, and early success arrived without emotional protection. As his fame grew, so did the narrowing of opportunity. Roles like Edward Scissorhands demonstrated real range, yet the industry continued to reduce him to the nerd. Adulthood did not bring immediate relief. Romantic relationships came and went, intense but short-lived, shaped by an unpredictable lifestyle and unresolved insecurity. Hall avoided marriage for years, wary of permanence he did not yet trust himself to maintain. Only later, with actress Lucia Oscarova, did his personal life begin to settle, and the birth of their son in 2023 marked a rare sense of grounding after decades of drift. Behind the scenes, the struggle was far heavier than his on-screen image suggested. Through the 1990s, Hall battled severe alcohol addiction alongside bipolar disorder and depression, watching momentum evaporate as casting calls slowed and health deteriorated. Recovery was not sudden or heroic. It was gradual, private, and fragile. His reappearance in high-profile projects like The Dark Knight felt less like a triumphant comeback than proof of survival. Today, Anthony Michael Hall is 58 years old, working steadily across film and television while producing under his own banner, choosing consistency over visibility. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, his career no longer reads as a rise or a fall, but as endurance, defined not by the roles that made him famous, but by the fact that he is still standing after nearly losing everything. John Kapelos as Carl. John Kapelos was born on March 8, 1956 in London, Ontario, Canada. At 29 years old, he played Carl, the observant school janitor in The Breakfast Club, a man who watches teenagers unravel while already knowing how the story ends. His quiet authority grounded the film, reminding viewers that disillusionment doesn't arrive suddenly. It accumulates. That weary clarity came from experience rather than imagination. Raised in a Greek immigrant household with limited means, Kapelos grew up negotiating cultural identity, financial pressure, and the constant feeling of being slightly out of place. Humor became both shield and currency. When he moved to Chicago and entered the fiercely competitive world of Second City, success was never guaranteed. Years passed without recognition, Auditions blended together, and anonymity became a test of whether persistence alone could count as talent. The breakthrough never arrived as a single moment. Instead, Kapelos built a career through repetition and trust. Casting directors learned they could rely on him. Roles in John Hughes' films beyond The Breakfast Club confirmed his presence, but rarely his name. While others chased leading man trajectories, Kapelos accepted the quieter path, turning supporting parts into something lived in and real, even as the industry rewarded visibility over craft. That endurance paid off slowly. Decades later, his work resurfaced in films like The Shape of Water, where his understated performance blended seamlessly into an Oscar-winning ensemble, and in television projects that favored texture over flash, including The Umbrella Academy. Each role reinforced a career built not on reinvention but on consistency, showing up prepared, believable, and unglamorous when the story needed it most. Now John Kapelos is 70 years old, still acting, teaching improv, mentoring younger performers, and producing independent projects. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, his legacy isn't measured in headlines or box office numbers. It's measured in longevity, the rare achievement of staying relevant without ever needing to shout, a presence that never left the room even when the spotlight moved on. Judd Nelson as John Bender. Judd Nelson was born on November 28, 1959, in Portland, Maine, United States. At 26 years old, he played John Bender, the volatile rebel who turns rage into armor in The Breakfast Club. The performance became the movie's exposed nerve, injecting threat, pain, and brutal honesty into a story that might otherwise have felt safe. That ferocity wasn't manufactured for the screen. Nelson grew up Jewish in elite Episcopalian schools, where anti-Semitism and social isolation sharpened his instinct to resist authority rather than appease it. He carried that anger with him when he dropped out of Haverford College and moved to New York to study under Stella Adler, scraping by financially while learning to weaponize truth in performance. What emerged wasn't polish, but intensity. Hollywood rewarded that danger almost overnight. In the same year as The Breakfast Club, Nelson headlined St. Elmo's Fire, becoming inseparable from the Brat Pack phenomenon that defined mid-1980s youth cinema. He doubled down on contrast by voicing Hot Rod in The Transformers, the movie, and taking on morally abrasive roles that resisted likability. Yet the same confrontational energy that electrified audiences complicated his reputation behind the scenes, and studios increasingly mistook intensity for liability. As tastes shifted in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Nelson's trajectory fractured. He sought darker, adult material, most notably The Ruthless Detective in New Jack City, but the industry had moved toward safer archetypes. Leading man momentum thinned, replaced by independent films, television arcs, and voice work that kept him working but outside the spotlight. He adapted, appearing in sitcom runs, thrillers, and returning to voice roles. Today, Judd Nelson is 67 years old, living quietly in Los Angeles and choosing projects selectively across film, television, and voice acting. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, his legacy remains unresolved by design, forever identified with the sound of teenage fury, and remembered as an actor whose talent burned brightest when Hollywood least knew how to contain it. Molly Ringwald as Claire Standish. Molly Ringwald was born on February 18, 1968, in Roseville, California, United States. At 17 years old, she played Claire Standish, the polished socialite suffocating behind privilege in The Breakfast Club. Her performance quietly dismantled the fantasy of popularity, revealing how wealth and beauty can isolate just as cruelly as poverty or rebellion, and giving the film its sharpest critique of class and image. Her rise was almost too fast to survive. Before adulthood had time to harden her identity, Ringwald became the defining face of 1980s youth cinema through John Hughes films, especially 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink. Fame arrived with strict conditions. She was expected to remain eternally young, thin, agreeable, and frozen in the image Hollywood had manufactured. While magazines crowned her a generational icon, the roles quietly narrowed, and creative control slipped further out of reach. When the teen idol era ended, Hollywood's affection vanished with it. Ringwald found herself passed over for adult roles she actively sought, watching darker, more complex parts offered elsewhere. Rather than fade slowly inside the system, she made a decisive break, relocating to France in the 1990s, working in European cinema, theater, and television, and rebuilding from near anonymity. It was a humbling reset, trading instant recognition for artistic survival without the American celebrity machine protecting or trapping her. The return was gradual and uneven. Back in the U.S., Ringwald re-emerged through independent films, Broadway and musical theater, and long-running television roles that favored maturity over novelty. Projects like The Secret Life of the American Teenager and later Riverdale allowed her to age publicly in an industry that typically erases women once youth fades. Alongside acting, she expanded into writing, essays, and cultural commentary, reframing her own legacy rather than allowing nostalgia to define it. By 2026, Molly Ringwald is 58 years old, active as an actress, writer, and outspoken cultural voice examining fame, gender, aging, and identity from the inside out. With an estimated net worth of around $11 million, her story no longer reads as a rise and fall Hollywood myth, but as something rarer, reinvention through refusal, proof that surviving the industry can demand more courage than conquering it ever did. Ally Sheedy, as Allison Reynolds. Ally Sheedy was born on June 13, 1962 in New York City, United States. At 23 years old, she played Allison Reynolds, the silent outsider who hides pain behind withdrawal in The Breakfast Club. The role gave the film its most unsettling presence, proving that silence, when ignored long enough, can become a scream, and that emotional neglect can be just as violent as abuse. That silence had roots long before Hollywood noticed her. After her parents' divorce in 1971, Sheedy grew up in an emotionally fractured household. Struggling to process instability, she lacked the language to explain. She turned inward, using creativity as a coping mechanism rather than expression. By age 12, she had already published a book, an achievement that impressed adults while quietly masking anxiety, loneliness, and a fear of being unseen. From an early age, productivity replaced emotional safety. Her career arrived quickly and forcefully. Early successes like War Games positioned her as intelligent and vulnerable, while the Brat Pack era elevated her visibility almost overnight. Films such as The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire turned her into a generational symbol, but the industry struggled to imagine her beyond that moment. Even when she demonstrated range in projects like Short Circuit, the demand for her early image began to fade, leaving fewer roles that matched her evolving depth. As mainstream momentum slowed, pressure accumulated internally. The combination of typecasting, insecurity, and relentless expectations took a toll on her mental health. In her personal life, Sheedy sought stability through marriage, wed to actor David Lansbury in 1992, hoping family might offer grounding her career no longer did. The reality proved harder. Balancing motherhood, an unpredictable industry, and emotional exhaustion strained the relationship, which ultimately ended in divorce in 2009. Supporting her transgender son became a source of pride but also emotional weight, requiring resilience under public scrutiny. Health struggles soon demanded confrontation. Years of chronic insomnia led to dependency on sleeping pills, quietly eroding her physical and psychological stability. Unlike earlier crises, this one forced a reckoning. Sheedy reclaimed control by channeling lived pain into performance, delivering a raw, transformative turn in high art. The role earned her the Independent Spirit Award and critical acclaim, not as a nostalgic figure, but as an artist capable of confronting darkness without disguise. Today, Ali Sheedy is 64 years old, teaching acting at the university level while working selectively in film and television, including later projects that value experience over image. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, her legacy is not defined by stardom, but by endurance. Mary Christian as Brian's sister. Mary Christian was born around 1978 in the United States. At just 7 years old, she appeared as Brian Johnson's younger sister in The Breakfast Club, a fleeting domestic presence framed between lectures and detentions. Though brief, the moment mattered. It grounded the film's emotional stakes in ordinary family life, reminding audiences that teenage pressure doesn't end when the school bell rings. Her connection to the film, however, ran far deeper than a single line on screen. Mary was the real-life younger sister of Anthony Michael Hall, one of the most recognizable teen stars of the 1980s. While her brother was pulled rapidly into fame, interviews, and expectation, Mary grew up alongside that machinery without ever being protected by it. Attention flowed past her, not toward her, creating a childhood shaped by proximity to celebrity rather than participation in it. Unlike many children briefly exposed to Hollywood, Mary did not chase the spotlight that brushed past her. After The Breakfast Club, she made a deliberate exit from acting, avoiding auditions, contracts, and the industry's appetite for youth. It was not a failure to continue, it was a refusal. At a time when many child performers were pushed forward without consent or preparation, Mary stepped back before identity could be replaced by image. Creativity, however, never vanished. Away from film sets, she found expression through music, later fronting the band Mary C. and the Stellars. The path was quieter and far less lucrative, built without publicists or nostalgia tours. It meant balancing artistic drive with ordinary financial realities. No safety net of residuals, no name recognition to open doors. But it also meant ownership of her voice. In 2026, Mary Christian is 48 years old, living a private life and performing creatively on her own terms. With an estimated net worth of around $100,000, her story is not one of loss or disappearance, but of conscious withdrawal. In a culture that equates visibility with value, her legacy is quieter and more radical, the choice to step away before the damage begins. Ron Dean as Andy's father. Ron Dean was born on August 15, 1938 in Chicago, Illinois, United States. At 47 years old, he played Andy Clark's father in The Breakfast Club, a stern, winning-obsessed parent whose disappointment cuts deeper than anger. The role sharpened the film's critique of inherited pressure, exposing how parental ambition can quietly wound long before any words are spoken. That severity was not invented for the camera. Dean grew up in a working-class Chicago household where money was tight and expectations were practical, not artistic. Acting was not an early dream. It came later, after years of manual labor and ordinary jobs that left little room for illusion. When he finally turned toward performance, he carried blue-collar realism into every audition, authority that felt earned, not theatrical, and it quickly defined the kinds of roles he was offered. As his career unfolded, that authenticity became both his strength and his ceiling. Dean was repeatedly cast as detectives, cops, prosecutors, and hardened officials, the men who deliver rules rather than bend them. Appearances in films like The Fugitive and Rudy made him instantly recognizable, even if audiences rarely knew his name. Directors trusted him. Casting directors relied on him, yet leading roles remained out of reach, a common fate for character actors who hold scenes together without ever owning them. Television extended that endurance. Across decades, Dean appeared in countless series, often as recurring authority figures, building a resume defined by volume and reliability rather than breakout moments. His work ethic kept him employed while others faded, but it also reinforced a quiet frustration, consistency without elevation. In later years, his reputation crystallized rather than expanded. Roles in respected projects, culminating with his appearance in The Dark Knight, confirmed his status as a Chicago fixture. He became one of those actors audiences trusted instinctively, even if they could not place his name. Sadly, Ron Dean died on October 5, 2025, at 87 years old, in Chicago, following a long illness. With an estimated net worth of about $1.5 million, his legacy rests in endurance, decades of dependable performances that quietly held American film and television together, proving that not all careers are built to shine. Some are built to last. Mercedes Hall as Brian's mom. Mercedes Hall was born in 1948 in Massachusetts, United States. At 37 years old, she appeared as Brian Johnson's mother, the anxious, demanding parent at home in The Breakfast Club. Her brief presence anchored the film's off-screen pressures, reminding viewers that expectations don't end at the school door. Her life behind that moment was already shaped by sacrifice. A blues singer raising children largely on her own, Hall faced early divorces and financial instability, moving frequently to keep work coming. Survival required momentum, and stability was something she built day by day rather than inherited. Music remained her center, even as acting offered occasional opportunities. Appearances in projects like The Doberman Gang and later Funny Valentine reflected a career lived on the margins, creative but rarely comfortable. Managing her son Anthony's early success added strain, especially as his fame collided with addiction and burnout. Marriage offered little permanence. Divorced first from Anthony Michael Hall's father and later from Thomas Chestaro, Hall carried the weight of responsibility forward, balancing care, management, and performance without a safety net. The cost was quiet exhaustion rather than public collapse. Today, Mercedes Hall is 78 years old, retired from performing and living privately. With an estimated net worth of around $500,000 earned through music, brief acting work, and management, her story is one of persistence, proof that the unseen labor behind stardom can be the hardest role of all. The story of The Breakfast Club didn't end when the detention bell rang. It followed these actors into decades of pressure, loss, reinvention, and survival. Some found peace far from the spotlight. Others paid a heavy price for early fame, and a few quietly endured in the background, holding the industry together without applause. So which journey shocked you the most? And which one stayed with you longer than you expected? If these stories moved you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more then and now deep dives into the lives behind the films that shaped a generation.